My child, stop what you are doing right now. In this moment, before anything else reaches your ears today, I need you to stop everything and receive what I am about to say to you. Not because something is wrong, but because something is right, more right and more complete than you have allowed yourself to believe in a very long time, and I will not let another day pass without you knowing it. This message was not easy for you to find today. I want you to know that. Something was working against it reaching you, working with intention and with the specific goal of keeping you in the quiet confusion of not knowing, of wondering why certain people have been so strange in your presence lately, of carrying the vague heaviness of feeling, watched without being able to name by whom or for what purpose. Forces that would rather you stayed in that uncertain space, never quite sure what is being said about you or decided about you when you are not in the room, but you found it anyway, beloved. Or rather, I made sure it found you. I rerouted it. I pressed it through the noise and the distraction and the 1,000 other things that were competing for your attention on this particular Sunday morning. I placed it in your path at this specific time, at this precise moment in your week, because what I am about to speak into your life is not generic, and it is not coincidental. It is for you specifically. On this day, in this season, with everything you have been quietly carrying under the surface of your composed exterior. That was not an accident, my beloved. That was an appointment written long before this Sunday ever arrived on the calendar. And if something in your chest tightened the moment you pressed play, if something in you felt a kind of inner recognition before the words even began, that is not anxiety, and it is not overthinking. That is your spirit responding to something it already knows because I prepared it. I whispered into the deepest part of you, days before this word arrived, that something was shifting, that a word was coming, that the ground beneath your feet was rearranging in ways your physical eyes had not yet been given permission to see. So do not dismiss that feeling, my child. Lean into it. Stay here, because what I have for you today is not a vague encouragement. It is a report, my beloved, a specific and detailed account of something that happened this Sunday, something that changed the nature of what surrounds you, and you deserve to know what it was. Most people will scroll past a word this specific, this particular, this carefully targeted toward the exact shape of what they have been quietly holding inside. You did not. That decision, the one that made you stop and stay and listen, was already written, my child. And what I am about to release into this moment is exactly what I intended for exactly this place in your life. I want you to understand something about the nature of this Sunday, my beloved. There was a quality to this day that was different from ordinary days, a particular weight in the spiritual atmosphere that those who are sensitive to these things may have noticed without being able to articulate it. Something was happening on your behalf in a dimension you cannot see from where you stand, and I want to walk you into the knowledge of it, not to cause you to be troubled, but to cause you to understand the fullness of what being covered truly means in the practical, day-to-day. Someone is saying your name in rooms you are not in reality of your life. The covering I have placed over you is not theoretical, my child. It is not a concept that lives in Scripture and stays there. It is an active, operating, moment-by-moment reality that functions whether you are aware of it or not, whether you feel it or not. And this Sunday was a day when that covering became visible in a particular way, visible to those who were least expecting to see it and were most invested in not finding it. I was moving on your behalf, my beloved, in places you did not know were even in need of that movement. I was present in conversations you did not know were happening. I was in rooms where your name was being spoken, not in celebration, not in support, but with the specific intention of settling a question that had been forming in certain minds for a while. And the way I was present in those rooms, my child, was not passive. I was not simply observing. I was acting. I was opening what they needed to see, and closing what they needed to not see, and arranging what they encountered so that when the conclusion arrived, it was not the one they came looking for. There was a gathering. I want you to know this clearly, not a public one, not something announced with fanfare or organized with visible formality, a quiet convergence of people who have been watching you, who have been collecting their observations the way someone collects items they intend to present as evidence. They came together with what they believed was a shared purpose rooted in discernment. But I want you to know the truth of what gathered them, because the truth of it is far simpler and far more ancient than the sophisticated justifications they gave themselves. The real question underneath all of it was this: what is really holding this person up? Because what they had been seeing in your life did not make sense when filtered through the framework they used to understand how the world works. The peace they observed when your circumstances gave every reason for unraveling, the quiet steadiness when the storms around you were the kind that should have dismantled someone with far more visible support than they believed you to have. The doors that opened for you when there was no natural explanation for why they opened. The provision that arrived through channels that no amount of strategic positioning could have manufactured. The protection that was visible even to people who did not want to acknowledge the source of what they were seeing. They had been watching, and they had been gathering their observations with the careful energy of people who have decided they are doing something responsible. But underneath all of that, my child, the real motive was simpler and older than any of the reasons they gave themselves. They needed to find the flaw. They needed to locate the crack in the foundation, the place where the story you seemed to be living broke down into something explainable, something ordinary, something that could be filed away in the category of luck or illusion. Because if there was no flaw, my beloved, if what they kept glimpsing in your life was genuinely what it appeared to be, then something was true about you that would require them to revise what they had already decided. So they gathered, and they spoke your name in a room you were not in, and they believed, with a confidence that felt to them like certainty, that they were about to confirm everything they had already decided. I want you to know, my child, that I was in that room before any of them walked through the door. Type "I am covered." Type it not as a wish and not as a hope for something that might one day be true. Type it as a declaration of what is already your reality. Because when you type those words today, heaven reads it as your formal acknowledgement of the active, operating, present tense covering that has been on your life in every room where your name has been spoken, including every room you never knew about. Every word spoken in faith is recorded, and what you declare in this moment matters more than you may realize right now. They came with questions, and they came with what they believed was evidence. My child, I want to walk you through what they examined, because I want you to see your own life the way I have always seen it, through eyes that are not limited by perspective or prejudice, or the fear that shapes what people choose to notice. They looked at the places in your history where you stumbled, the ones that were visible, the ones that could be pointed to and named and added to a collection. They looked at the seasons where the fruit of your faithfulness had not yet broken through the surface, where all that was apparent to anyone watching was the waiting and the stretching and the cost, with no visible return on what was being invested. They gathered those moments, and they laid them out like photographs on a table, and they said to each other, "Look, this is what this person is really made of." Beneath the appearance of favor, here is the reality. They pointed to the silence you kept when others in the room were speaking loudly and positioning themselves visibly. They misread that silence as defeat, as evidence that you had nothing worth contributing. They pointed to the times you stepped back instead of pushing forward, the moments where you did not compete for what others were reaching for. They misread that as weakness. They pointed to the doors that seemed closed to you during particular seasons, while others walked through them with apparent ease. They had a whole collection of these misreadings, my beloved, carefully organized, reviewed more than once. And they believed, going into that gathering, that when they laid it all out together, the picture that would emerge would be the one they had already sketched in their minds. Ordinary, covered in the appearance of something more, but underneath it, ordinary, explainable, my daughter. They were so certain. They had written the conclusion before they reviewed the evidence, and they were simply going through the motions of an investigation so that the predetermined conclusion would feel as though it had been arrived at honestly. That is the nature of a misled inquiry, my child. It does not seek truth. It seeks confirmation of what fear and pride have already collaborated to decide. What they did not know, what they could not have accounted for in any version of the case they had so carefully assembled, is that every moment they gathered as evidence of your inadequacy was actually a moment during which I was doing something in you that cannot be observed from the outside. The stumbles they catalogued were not evidence of weakness. They were the natural and necessary cost of real growth happening in a real life. Only things that are genuinely alive and genuinely growing can genuinely stumble. The curated presentation, the performance, does not stumble because it is not actually moving anywhere. But you are actually moving, my child. And genuine movement in genuine terrain produces genuine stumbles. And none of those stumbles were evidence that the journey was wrong. They were evidence that the journey was actually happening. The waiting seasons they pointed to as evidence of abandonment were not seasons where I had turned away from you, my beloved. They were seasons of root development. Every gardener who has ever tended something that grows understands the necessity of the root phase, the period of growth that happens underground, in the dark, without visible evidence that anything is happening, because everything that is happening in the invisible, in the preparation that makes visible fruit possible and sustainable when it finally comes. The silence they misread as defeat was the silence of someone who had learned, often through difficult experience, to let me fight the battles that were mine to fight. The stepping back they read as weakness was the movement of someone who had grown into the understanding that the most powerful position in any situation is not always the most visible one, and that restraint exercised from a place of genuine trust is not the same thing as the restraint of someone who has nothing to offer. The closed doors they catalogued as rejection were not rejections, my daughter, not one of them. They were redirections, each one a specific act of navigation in a journey whose full route they could not see. I saw all of it. I see all of it still, and the record that I have been keeping of your faithfulness in those moments. The real record, not the document they were building, but the one that exists in the archive of heaven, is not what they thought they were studying when they looked at the same events. It is something else entirely, my child. Something that, when they encountered it, they did not have a category for. Heaven kept a record of every day you chose faithfulness, when faithlessness would have been considerably easier. My child, every morning you chose to rise and continue when lying down felt like the only honest response to how exhausted you were. Every prayer you prayed through tears in the dark, the prayers where you were not fully sure the words were reaching anywhere at all, where you continued anyway because the habit of reaching toward me was deeper than the doubt. Every act of generosity you extended in seasons when generosity felt like subtraction from a diminishing account. Every time you held your tongue, my beloved, when the truth you had every right to speak would have been so satisfying to deliver and so destructive to the long-term fabric of things. Every time you forgave before the person who needed your forgiveness had shown any sign of deserving it. Every time you trusted me in the dark, my daughter, in the silent seasons, in the seasons where the only reason to continue trusting was the quiet, persistent conviction that I had not left and that the darkness would eventually thin. That record exists, my child. It is not metaphorical. It is a real accounting of real choices made in real time, and it is more complete than any documentation any human investigation has ever produced. And this Sunday, I opened it. I opened it in the presence of those who thought they had gathered enough against you to draw a conclusion. And what they found in that record, my beloved, was not what any human assembled evidence package could have prepared them for. Stay with me, my child. If these words are finding the places in you that have been waiting quietly and without announcement to be found, the places that have been wondering in the middle of the night whether any of this is real, whether the faithfulness is registering anywhere, whether the covering is as complete as you have been choosing to believe, press the follow button below. Stay close to where I am speaking. What I am releasing through this channel is not finished with you, not by a long measure. And now I want to tell you what happened in that room when they opened what they had gathered, my beloved, because this is the part you were meant to hear on this particular Sunday. This is the center of the appointment I arranged for you. They opened what they had carefully assembled with the confidence of people who have done their preparation and are ready to present their findings. They looked at the whole of it together, the full collection, expecting that the composite picture would be the one they came expecting to confirm, and instead, something else happened, something that none of them had language for in the moment it occurred. They did not find the flaw they had been looking for. The crack they expected to find in the foundation was not there, and in its absence, in the place where ordinary was supposed to break through and the story was supposed to fall apart into something explainable, they found a pattern that ran through everything they had gathered, a thread that connected the observations in a way that produced a picture very different from the one they had sketched in advance. The consistency they found had no natural explanation within the framework they had been applying. The timing of things, when they looked at them side by side, was uncanny in a way that coincidence could not comfortably hold. The specific nature of the protection they had observed, when it was laid out alongside the specific nature of what it had been protecting against, was not the protection of a lucky person. It was the protection of a covered person. And there is a difference between those two things that anyone who has spent real time in the study of patterns of grace can recognize immediately. They began to see it, my child, against their intentions, against the conclusion they had brought into the room with them. They began to see what was actually in the record. They began to see what I see when I look at your life. And the first response to seeing what I see when someone encounters it without preparation and without the framework of faith that makes it comprehensible, is silence. Not the silence of thought, not the silence of processing. The silence that happens when a category dissolves, when the explanation you came prepared to give meets something that refuses to fit inside it, and the explanation has nowhere to go. They went silent, my beloved, and in that silence was the recognition, even among those who would have preferred not to recognize it, that what they had been studying was marked, that the life they had assembled evidence about was not the life of someone ordinary wearing the costume of something more. It was the life of someone carrying something that was placed there long before any of them began watching. They found my fingerprint, my child, unmistakable once seen, and they had no protocol for what to do with what they were looking at. Type they found his mark. Type it, because what you are declaring is not aspirational. It is historical. It happened this Sunday. They found it. The mark was there because it has always been there. And when you type those words, you are adding your voice to the testimony of what they encountered in that room. A testimony that is now being spoken in places seen and unseen. I want to tell you about the silence, my beloved, because it deserves more description than a single word can carry. It was not a comfortable silence. Not the silence of a conversation that has found a natural pause. It was the silence of people who had walked into a room carrying certainty and were leaving with something they had not brought and were not sure how to hold. The ground dissolved under them when they opened what they had gathered, because the evidence did not cooperate with the conclusion. And the experience of certainty dissolving is not a comfortable one, my child. It leaves a particular residue, something that sits between confusion and a very specific kind of fear. Not the fear of danger in the immediate sense, the older fear. The fear that arrives when you realize you have been moving in territory you did not understand, and the territory has just revealed something about itself that you were not prepared for. The fear of those who have touched something marked without knowing it was marked until the mark became visible. That fear began to move through the room. My beloved, the one who was being studied became the one being feared. The one who was the subject of the investigation became the one in whose life the investigators encountered something that exceeded their categories. And the fear in that room was not manufactured by anything you did or said. You were not there. You were not involved. You made no move. You had no knowledge of the gathering until I gave you knowledge of it in this moment. The shift happened entirely because I moved, because I opened a record in front of those who had been building a case. And what was in that record was not what they were equipped to handle. The fear that reversed in that room is the natural consequence of what happens when people who have been moving against what is covered discover, suddenly and undeniably, that it is covered. That is not something I arranged as punishment, my daughter. It is simply the nature of what covering is and what it does when it becomes visible to those who were not expecting to see it. The fact that you are still here, my beloved, that you have stayed through every word, that something in you continued to hold on and receive even as this word has moved through territory that is specific and weighty and requires your full attention. The fact of your staying is itself the evidence that this word is yours. What I am about to release in the next moments is not for those who have already gone. It is for those who remained, because you are still here. What I release in this next moment belongs specifically to those who stayed. Think of someone in your life, my child, who also knows what it feels like to have their name spoken in rooms they were not in. someone whose faithfulness has been observed through the lens of misunderstanding, someone who has been studied by people who were not looking for what they actually found, someone who is still carrying the uncertainty of not knowing whether the covering on their life is as real and as active as what has been spoken about you today. Sow a seed in their name, not from obligation, not because the act will purchase anything for you, but from the overflow of what you have received here today, from the place of knowing that what I spoke into your life this Sunday is real, and that the same covering that is on you is available to those who belong to me. Visit the link in the description below, or scan the QR code on screen. What you sow from this particular place, having heard what you have heard today, having received the report of what happened on your behalf in that room this Sunday, is a seed sown on deeply prepared ground, and seeds sown on prepared ground grow beyond what the seed itself contained. Type "I stand in peace." Type it as the declaration of your position right now, in this moment, having heard what has been spoken. The peace you are declaring is not the peace of someone who has not faced opposition. It is the peace of someone who knows that the opposition encountered what it was not prepared for. It is the peace of someone who did not have to enter the room to be defended in it. When you type those words, you are making a declaration that heaven reads as your acceptance of the settlement that was reached in that room this Sunday on your behalf. You stood in peace while I stood in that room. Declare it. Now I want to speak into who you actually are, my beloved, because this is the part that the investigation encountered and could not contain, and I want you to hear it from me directly so that you do not minimize it or deflect it or treat it as a nice thought without substance. Before you were born, my child, I knew what I was placing in you, not in the general sense that I know all things, but in the specific, intentional, purposeful sense of a craftsman who knows exactly what they are building and exactly what function it is designed to serve. I knew the particular shape of the calling. I knew the specific texture of the light you were going to carry, and I knew, going into it with full awareness, that the kind of light I was placing in you would be confusing to people whose eyes were not calibrated for it. Some light comes through ordinary glass and bends in entirely predictable ways, and people who have watched it long enough can anticipate where it will fall and how it will behave. But the light I placed in you does not behave according to those predictions, my beloved. It reaches places that predictable light cannot reach. It illuminates things that predictable light passes over without touching. It persists in conditions where predictable light would be extinguished. And none of that is something you produced through your own effort. It was placed in you, my child, before your first breath, before your name was assigned, before anyone who is now watching you, studying you, gathering evidence about you, was aware that you existed. I chose what you would carry, and I chose it specifically because the world you were entering had a need for exactly that shape of light, in exactly the places you would move through, at exactly the moments you would arrive. The people who gathered to study you this Sunday did not know what they were looking at because they had not encountered it before. They did not have a framework that could hold what their investigation kept surfacing, which is why the conclusion kept refusing to cooperate with their expectations. Your calling is not a smaller version of what they understand to be significant, my beloved. Your anointing is not a lesser version of something they have seen before. The mark on your life is older than any observation anyone has made about you, older than any framework anyone has tried to apply to you, older than any room in which your name has ever been spoken, my daughter. The favor that has been following you, my beloved, the favor they observed and catalogued and still could not explain, is not random, and it is not luck, and it is not the result of positioning or performance. It is the outworking of a covenant established before you had the capacity to enter it for yourself, established on your behalf by one who could. I made promises over your life, my child, promises that are not conditional on the approval of those around you. Promises that do not expire when circumstances become difficult. Promises that do not require the comprehension or the cooperation of those who are watching from the outside. The windows of heaven that have been opened over you are not dependent on the vote of any gathering, on the verdict of any investigation, on the conclusions of any room where your name has been spoken in your absence. When I speak through Isaiah 54:17 and say that no weapon formed against you shall prosper, my daughter, I am not speaking poetry. I am describing a governing reality, a structure built into the fabric of the life that belongs to me. No weapon. Not some weapons. Not weapons that are poorly aimed, No weapon, not one that is formed against you, shall prosper. And every tongue that rises against you in judgment, I will render impotent. That is not a future possibility contingent on your performance, my child. That is the verdict that was already written when you were brought under the covering of my covenant. The strength they witnessed in you during the seasons they gathered as evidence of struggle, that strength was not yours alone, my beloved. And I want to be precise about this. It was not your raw endurance that produced what they kept seeing in your life. You paid prices in those seasons that were genuine and that left genuine marks, my child. But the reason you were able to continue paying those prices, the reason the paying did not finally destroy you even in the moments where it came very close, was because I was sustaining the deepest part of you, the part that makes the decision to continue, the part that wakes up in the morning and chooses to remain in the story. Philippians 4:13 is not a motivational slogan. It is a technical description of how faithfulness operates in seasons that exceed human capacity. The strength that others witnessed was mine moving through you, my daughter. The endurance was mine, rooted in you. The peace that confused them was mine, settled in you at a level that sits below the reach of circumstances. You were never carrying the weight alone, my child, and that is why, when they looked at the whole record of your life, what they found was not the portrait of a person straining under their own strength and occasionally failing under the load. What they found was the portrait of a person held, my beloved, held in seasons where the circumstances argued loudly that no one was holding, held in the dark, held in the silent stretches, held in the moments where the evidence of being held was nowhere visible, held. And that holding is not a metaphor. It is the most concrete thing in your life. Now I want to speak about what happens to those who gather against the one I have marked, my beloved, and I want you to receive this not as satisfaction at another's defeat. What I am speaking about is consequence, the natural, built-in, unavoidable consequence that operates when human movement is directed against what is covered. The plans that were formed in that room this Sunday will not prosper, my child. Not because I am reaching in to actively destroy each specific plan in a dramatic act of intervention, but because plans formed against what I have marked carry within them the mechanism of their own reversal. They are built on the wrong foundation, the evidence they gathered, the observations they assembled, the conclusions they reached. None of it has stable ground to stand on because the reality they were trying to describe is not the reality that actually exists. And plans built on an incorrect reading of reality have a specific trajectory. They bend back toward those who formed them. Job 5:12 describes this. He frustrates the devices of the crafty so that their hands cannot perform their enterprise. And Proverbs 16:7 says that when your ways please the Lord, He makes even your enemies to be at peace with you. That peace does not always look like friendship, my daughter. Sometimes it looks like silence. The specific silence of people who came intending to speak and found the words were gone when they opened their mouths. The tongues that were ready to move against you this Sunday encountered something they were not prepared for. And in that encounter, the readiness dissolved. This is the operation of Isaiah 54:17 in your actual life. My beloved, in real time, on a Sunday that you lived through without knowing what I have just described to you was happening, the weapons were formed. They were real weapons, assembled with real intentions by real people who believed they had gathered enough to make them work. And they did not prosper. They did not prosper because you are under a covering that I placed there, and that no assembly of observations or evidence or intentions can penetrate, my child. The evidence they gathered about you has not been destroyed, my beloved. It has been transformed. Every moment they catalogued as proof of your weakness is now a moment that functions as testimony of my faithfulness. Every season of waiting they pointed to as evidence of abandonment is now a demonstration of how I develop what I am building in someone's life underground, in the invisible phase of preparation. Every closed door they listed as evidence of rejection is now an example of how I redirect the journey toward a destination others cannot see. The very case they built against you has become the clearest argument for what is real in your life, my child. Because when you lay the observations next to the outcomes, what emerges is not the story of someone ordinary wearing a borrowed costume. What emerges is the unmistakable story of active grace at work in a real life. They gathered the material without understanding what they were gathering, and the material itself became the evidence that undermined the conclusion they were trying to support. That is a particular kind of justice. My beloved, the truth of your life, the full and complete truth of it, including every stumble and every silence, and every closed door they pointed to, is the evidence of a person covered and called and continually redirected and never abandoned. That truth held its shape even in the hands of people who were trying to use it to prove something else. And what they found, my daughter, when they stopped trying to make it fit the picture they had sketched in advance and simply looked at what was actually there, was the fingerprint. My fingerprint on everything they touched. Type, he defends me. Type it, because the defense was not theoretical, and it was not postponed until a more convenient time. He defended you today, on this Sunday, in that room, before you knew there was anything to be defended against. The defense was complete before you received the report of it. And when you declare it, you are not asking for something that might happen. You are acknowledging something that already did. In the next 48 hours, my beloved, I need to prepare you for something, and I want you to hear this as protection rather than alarm. It is possible that someone from that room will attempt one more movement in your direction. A message that arrives through an unexpected channel, a comment that reaches you through someone you considered neutral, a small rumor, not large enough to constitute a formal accusation, but shaped to plant a seed of doubt and shift something back toward the position it was in before this Sunday. Do not be alarmed, my child. When a fire is going out, it sometimes produces one final flare before the dark settles. That flare is not evidence that the fire is reigniting. It is evidence that the fire is ending. Do not give that movement your energy, my beloved. Do not respond to it or try to correct the record by speaking into it. Let it flare. Let it settle. Stand still and know that the verdict in that room this Sunday is not undone by a final flare of something that has already lost its foundation. Psalm 46:10 says, "Be still and know that I am God." The stillness in that verse is not the stillness of someone waiting for rescue, my daughter. It is the stillness of someone who has received the report from the battlefield and knows how it ends. Be still in these next 48 hours. The movement you might feel is not a sign that this word was wrong. It is confirmation that it was right, my child. You do not have to provide a response. I already did. Send this to someone whose name has been spoken in the wrong rooms, my child. There is a person, and I suspect their name is already present in your awareness, who needs to hear what has been spoken today. Someone who does not yet know that I was in the room where their name was being discussed. Someone who is still carrying the uncertain weight of feeling watched and evaluated without being able to name the source of that feeling. Someone who needs the report that the same covering on your life is on theirs, that the same fingerprint found in your record is in theirs, that the same silence that fell in the room where your name was being spoken will fall in the room where their name is being spoken. Send this to them. Let them know that I saw every word said about them. Let them know I was there before the first word was spoken. The fact that you are still listening at this point is itself the evidence that this word belongs to you. The ones for whom it was not intended have already moved on. You are still here. That is not incidental. That is the confirmation. Because you did not scroll past this today, my beloved, because something in you stopped and stayed and listened all the way to this place. What I am releasing into this moment is specifically for those who held on long enough to receive it, not a general blessing that floats over the surface of a life and does not penetrate. What I am releasing is the specific blessing of the one who was studied and not found wanting, because what the study found instead was the evidence of covering, the blessing of the one who remained faithful in the unseen seasons, in the underground seasons, and is now approaching the season where what was prepared underground becomes visible. That blessing is specific to you, my child, because the faithfulness that prepared you for it was specific to you. It was lived in your particular circumstances, in your particular body, with your particular history, in your particular silence, and your particular continued choosing of trust, when distrust would have been completely understandable. I see the full record, not the edited version, the complete and unabbreviated record. And what I see in it is not a person barely making it. It is a person who has been faithfully moving through exactly the territory required to arrive at the threshold that is now in front of them. Type, I receive this. Type it, because the posture of receiving is an active posture, not a passive one. Receiving requires that your hands are open. Receiving requires that you have put down the weight of needing to earn what is being given. Receiving requires that you acknowledge the giver and the gift simultaneously. Type it as your declaration that your hands are open, that you have put down what needed to be put down, and that what I am releasing into your life in this moment is welcome and received. What is received in faith does not return empty. My child, I want to speak a blessing over you now that is specific to this Sunday and to everything that happened in your life today, most of which you experienced without knowing what was happening in the dimension I have been describing to you. I bless you with the peace of the person who has been vindicated without lifting a finger, not the exhausted peace of someone who finally won through effort, but the settled, quiet, complete peace of the one who watched the battle be fought entirely on their behalf, and was asked to do nothing except remain in faithfulness. I bless you with the rest of the one who has received the report from the battlefield and knows how it ended, a rest that is not passive, but the rest of someone who knows that what needed to happen already has, and who is now free to move forward without the weight of a battle that I already entered and completed. I bless your silence this week, my beloved. The silence you kept when you could have spoken and chose not to. The silence that looked from the outside like defeat, but was actually the silence of someone who had learned that I fight more effectively when my child is still. I bless every moment of restraint that cost you something. I bless every prayer prayed in the dark that felt like it was going nowhere. I bless the faithfulness that was invisible to the people who were watching, the kind of faithfulness that does not produce visible results in the short term and is therefore the most genuine kind, because it is practiced not for its audience, but because it is right. I bless your next step, whatever it is, wherever I am directing you in this season following this Sunday. I bless the doors I am about to open over your life, the doors that Revelation 3:8 describes. I have placed before you an open door, and no one can shut it. Not the people who gathered this Sunday, not anyone who has spoken your name in a room you were not in. The door I am opening no one can shut, and I bless the calling that confused them. My beloved, the particular shape of the light I placed in you that did not fit inside their categories. The favor that ran through the evidence they gathered and refused to be explained. That calling is yours. It is not borrowed, and it is not contingent, and it is not subject to revision based on anyone's findings. It was placed in you before you could do anything to deserve it or disqualify yourself from it, and it is active right now. Right in this moment, active, my child, in the exact season you are currently living. What I began in you before your first breath is still in motion. Isaiah 46:10 says that I declare the end from the beginning, from ancient times what is still to come. I say my purpose will stand. My purpose for your life is standing right now. This Sunday was not the disruption of that purpose. It was the advancement of it. The gathering that was called with the intention of settling a question about your life became, through my rearrangement of what they encountered, a gathering that served my purpose instead of theirs. Every gathering that has been called against you has, in the end, served my purpose. Romans 8:28 says, all things work together for good for those who love me and are called according to my purpose. All things, my beloved. Not some things. Not the easy and comfortable things that look like favor from the beginning. All things working together for good. You are loved. You are called. Everything that has touched your life is being worked, including this Sunday, including that room, including the silence that fell in it. Jeremiah 29:11 says, the plans I have for you are plans for a future and a hope. Those plans were not disrupted by what happened this Sunday. They were advanced. And the next chapter of what I am building in your life will become visible in ways that do not require your effort or your management. Go into this week knowing what I told you. Go knowing I was there before any of them arrived, and that I will be present in every room where your name is spoken, in every gathering called to settle a question about you. I am there first, and I am not there as an observer. Go in peace, my child. Go in the specific peace of the one who has received the report, and let the peace you carry in the coming days be its own testimony. If what was spoken here today has settled something in you that needed settling, something that has been restless and uncertain, and waiting for a word this specific to land in it, sow a seed as an act of faith, Not because you owe anything to anyone, not because the seed purchases something that was otherwise unavailable, but because something in you knows that what was released here is real, that the appointment that brought you to this word was not an accident, and that the response of a faithful heart to a genuine word from heaven is an open hand and an act of trust. Visit the link in the description below or scan the QR code on screen. For the person whose name is already on your heart right now, the person whose name came to you earlier in this word and has stayed, the person who also needs to know that I was in the room, that I saw every word, that their covering is real and active and not dependent on the comprehension of those who have been watching them. This seed is yours to sow in their name, and what heaven honors in secret, what is sown in the quiet act of faith when no one is watching and nothing is being performed, it will reveal in full. The full revelation of what has been sown in faith is always worth waiting for.